All right. We are almost to the end of our reading month. And today we set our goal to each classroom have 100 units, 100 circles put up. I know some classrooms have made that goal, and some haven't yet. And today was the day you were going to do something to Mr. Van Hammond. What was it? Dye my hair. Those ugly colors of maize and blue. But I'm talked to Miss Allie, and we're going to give you through next week. Next week, Thursday, is our readathon, our whole read-in, and our pajama day to celebrate the end of reading month. So for those classrooms that haven't done all your reading yet, we're giving you a few more days to get it done. I was hoping I'd get away without having to dye my hair, but we'll give you guys one more week to try to get all that reading in so we can have a big celebration next week, Thursday, before we leave for spring break. So, Miss Allie, did you have anything to add to that?
You guys just keep doing the good work. A lot of people are noticing Mrs. Muma is all done with her 100 hours.
Yep. And as you noticed, as you came in, we have a special guest here. We have Crash from the West Michigan Whitecaps. And you know, in years past, the Whitecaps have sponsored our reading club where you can read so many hours and you can earn some free tickets. And Crash has been a guest of ours at Shawnee for a number of years, right, Miss Allie? All right, we had Griff from the Grand Rapids Griffins to kick off our reading month a few weeks back. And today, Crash is going to act out as I read this book. It's about a family reunion, but the title is called When Lightning Comes in a Jar. So you need to listen carefully, just like Crash will have to listen carefully. Crash has never heard this book before, but Crash is going to act out as I read, all right? And we want to leave this space because Crash will need some room to do his acting. So you guys be good listeners, as well as keep an eye on Crash to make sure that he is being a good listener and can act it out as well. So, Crash, you ready? All righty. When Lightning Comes in a Jar by Patricia Polacco. Today is my family reunion. I can hardly wait. My dad's side of the family will come soon. It's been ages since I've seen them all. Before our reunions, we're always at Grandma's house, but this year, it's going to be at mine. I'm so anxious to see my cousins, especially Lydia and Sandy. They'll be wearing the same colors that we always wear at family reunions. They wore them at our last reunion. How I remember that day. Grandma and I stood in front of her window, waiting for my relatives to come. I can't wait to see them all, I said to her. I know, she answered. Will there be Jell-O, like there always is, I asked. Yes, she answered. And baseball? And croquet, like there always is? And bag races too? And will you tell stories like you always do? Might, Grandma said, looking up at the sky, and we might catch lightning in a jar. Lightning in a jar? I asked. This was new. And then my relatives started driving up by the carload, one after another. Finally, a car I was waiting for rolled up with my 5 cousins, and they piled out Sandy, Freddie, Billy, Lydia, and Carl. Sandy and Lydia, I squealed, and we ran for the porch swing, just like we always did. We held hands and pushed the swing with our bare feet. We told secrets that we kept for a whole year. I told them about lightning in a jar. When my dad called out, "Who's going to help unload these baskets from the car?" We shouted, "We will," and we lugged baskets full and heavy to the tables in the maple grove. Wonder how many Jell-O salads there will be, my cousin Freddie asked. Gazillions, like there always are, said my cousin Billy. Sure enough, there were gazillions. They jumped and shook every time we bumped the table. They seemed alive. I bet there'll be many meatloafs too, my brother chimed in. And there were. We unpacked them, zillions of meatloafs. They were all different too. Each auntie had their own recipe, including Aunt Bertha, who made one with a hard-boiled egg in the middle. When we cut it, there was a perfect slice of egg, like a giant eye. Our aunties and grandma flitted about the tables like butterflies going from flower to flower. They perked up the lettuces or rearranged the tomatoes and set slices of meatloaf so they looked just perfect. When Grandma and the aunties took off their aprons, we knew it was time to gather at the table. We all held hands. Uncle Waylon said the blessing. Everyone sat down and dove into the food, piling it high on their plates, some as high as haystacks. My brother Richie was sitting with some older girls that came with our older cousins. He was acting silly. I could tell he liked one of them. Embarrassing. When we thought we couldn't eat anymore, Grandma and my aunties put their aprons back on and started getting all the pies and cakes from the kitchen. There was something magical about my grandma and her sisters this day, like they knew that there was something they weren't telling. I did wonder how Grandma was going to catch lightning in a jar, and every so often I'd stop her and ask her how. She'd just smile and say, "Easy, someday you'll do it too." After we ate, it was time for our annual baseball game. My dad and uncles against us kids. "Batter up," my dad called out as my cousin Billy stepped to the home plate. Lucky he was on our team. He could hit anything. When he was out in the field, he could leap high in the air and make impossible catches. That kid could jump higher than a cow's back, our uncles used to say. Our first pitch out, Billy hit the ball so hard, it clean disappeared. We thought we saw lightning as it hit the sky. Maybe the lightning was on its way. Was that the way Grandma was going to catch lightning in a jar? "I'm going to be a Detroit Tiger someday," Billy said. We all knew that he most certainly would. Next time, it was for the game of croquet, the biggest game of the day, which our uncles kept interrupting with friendly quarrels about bent hoops, crooked wickets, and wanting to take reshots. We had bag races and watermelon spitting contests, and rides on Grandpa's draft horse, too. Until Grandpa waved the yardstick in the air, all of us kids dropped what we're doing, and we ran to the milk shed. We knew it was time to get measured. We did this every year. I like looking at the marks of my grandma and her sisters and her brothers on the same doorway. Some shorter than mine. Hard to imagine that they once were just like me. All those traditions of their family reunion. Aunt Bertha had gone to the house and fetched the family portrait albums. The auntie showed us old brown photos and pointed. That was their father, who saved souls as a circuit preacher when he wasn't farming. Look, there were favorite horses. Their eyes sparkled when they showed us their wedding pictures. The aunties were all married in their mother's parlor. I watched Grandma to see if she would summon lightning from the sky. She's still waiting. Figure out how they're going to catch lightning in a jar. It's time for our family photo. Aunt Iva called out as she jumped up and grabbed her camera. We kids didn't like this part because it meant that if we had any dirt on our faces, it would be scraped off with a hanky that our auntie spit on, especially mine. Everybody smiled, Aunt Iva sang out. After this, the kids started to chant, Stories, stories, stories. Grandma and her sisters and brothers started quiet and slow. Uncle Ernest told us about milking cows faster than lightning. Grandma told us about how she and her sisters would walk 7 miles to a one-room schoolhouse over in Locke Center, and how each of them taught at that same school. Then there was some quiet as Aunt Iva started fanning herself. We knew she was getting ready. I remember the day I was driving the rig home from school when I came upon a real rattlesnake. We looked at one another. Rattlers weren't around these parts, so we knew this was going to be good. That thing was all coiled up and shaking its tail. Not a rattling sound, something more like a loud buzz. Bellhorse just stood there and shook. "What'd you do, Aunt Iva?" we asked. "Well, sir, I stepped out of that buggy, took my umbrella, and put it smack in the middle of that snake all coiled up. It just wrapped around my umbrella. I knew if it struck me, I would be a goner." We all leaned forward. So I picked it up and gave the umbrella a sharp jerk and flung the snake way over into Cecil Potter's field. Then I jumped into my buggy and galloped home like the wind. All of my aunts and uncles laughed, and a flicker of heat lightning sprang out of the horizon. The air didn't move. Was some magic going to happen? Aunt Ida fluttered her fan. We knew she was getting ready to top Aunt Iva's story. Have I ever told you children about the time I took a ride in the first newfangled motor car here in this county? No, the kids sang out. Well, sir, it belonged to Eldie Dunkel. My pa didn't approve of him. No, never, no how. He's a wild kid, he'd rave. Don't never want to see you with the likes of him. Then one day, when I was walking home from a prayer meeting, he rolled up next to me, driving the shiniest machine I'd ever seen. Aunt Ida stopped and fanned some more. "What happened, Aunt Ida?" we asked. "Well," Aunt Ida crowed, "I climbed right into that thing. Eldie shifted that contraption, making a terrible sound, and that roadster almost leapt right out from under us. We went so fast, my hat blew clean off. We were going almost 40 miles an hour. We raced up Moyer Road, hurtled about Ivy Peters' barn, and almost flattened the Bender Sisters fruit stand, then howled down Dice Road." We gasped. And then we skidded to stop right in front of Pa's barn. He was there, just a-standing there. She stopped again and fanned herself. "Well, what'd he do, Aunt Ida? What happened?" we all pleaded. "Not a blessed thing," she answered, and laughed so hard he almost dropped her lemonade. Heat lightning flickered again. There was a low rumble of thunder off in the distance. Now I watched my grandmother. She smiled and gave me a wink. It was her turn. "Well, sir," Grandma began, "I was but a girl, out plowing, helping Pa with the fields, and his team would pull those rows straight as an arrow. When the team reared and bolted and dragged me halfway down the field before I could free myself, I stood up there, and there's a fierce clattering roar above me." We all leaned toward her. "Was it like thunder and fierce lightning?" She stopped and sipped her lemonade. "What was it, Grandma?" we kids begged. I looked up, waiting for the lightning. "Well, sir, I couldn't believe what I seen above me." We crawled closer to her knee. There, like a giant dragonfly, with 2 sets of wings, growling and roaring, pitching and rolling, spewing foul-smelling smoke, she leaned forward. It was the first ever flying machine in the state of Michigan. We all clapped with delight. That would have been a perfect time for lightning to come, but it didn't. It was almost dark. I whispered to Grandma, "What about lightning in the jar?" She adjusted her glasses, gave me a look. "Have the last rays of sun left the grass?" she asked. I looked real hard. "Yes," I said. "Then sit down, child." So it's sunset time. Aunt Bertha brought a wicker laundry basket full of glass canning jars and set them at Grandma's feet. Many years ago, when your aunties and uncles and I were but children, our grandpa showed us what I'm about to show you. She leaned down and touched the grass, cupping something in her hand. She thought for a moment and said, "Shadows lengthen, the day near done. Birds fly low as the setting sun. Stars will rise from the earth below. In these hands their light will glow. Come up, lightning, come up, stars. We'll snatch you up in these here jars." She blew into her hands and let something go, and it flew for a moment and then landed deep in the grass. We watched and watched, but nothing happened. Low thundered, rumbled just above us. "Look," my cousin Billy called out. A small burst of starlight puffed out of the grass, and then more and more drifted out of the carpet of lawn beneath our feet. "Fireflies," we all called out. We grabbed the jars, and the dash was on to capture lightning to put in the jar. Grandma gave me a knowing look and smile. Well, there we go, lightning in a jar. We have fireflies right here in Michigan in the summer. When everyone had gone home that night, Grandma and I sat on the porch swing together. We looked at the flickering jar, and even though the fireflies are common in Michigan on summer nights, never had I seen so many that night. As long as I shall live, I'll believe that somehow Grandma called them up with her stories and her touch of magic. Not yet. That night seems so long ago, but the reunion is here again. My family is arriving. Now, my heart is racing. We'll eat scrumptious jello and meatloaf, play baseball and croquet, spit watermelon seeds, and scrawl new measurements on my milk house door jamb. We'll look in the photo albums. We'll laugh at some and cry at others. We'll remember the stories, how Grandma saw the first flying machine and Iva conquered that rattler. We'll talk about Billy and how he should have been a Detroit Tiger, but gave his life for his country in a war far away. Then, when the sun is low and the shadows long, we'll sit and fan ourselves in the shade of maple trees. Only a new crop of children will gather at our knees. My father, my grandmother, my aunts, my uncles are no longer here. So now it is we who must tell the stories and bring them back for fleeting moments. Then I will show you the children, the magic that my grandma showed me. I will call the stars from beneath their feet as they rise into the warm night air. These children will leap as high as a cow's back to gather them up. I'll send them home with full bellies, tired bones, and flickering jars in their laps. Their hearts will be overflowing, full of lightning, put there by folks who loved them even before they were born. Grandma knew this well. She also knew that someday she would tell her children all about us and the magic nights where we caught lightning in a jar. Well, thank you, Crash. Good job. Appreciate it. So, boys and girls, stories can have magic. You know, this story is about a family reunion, catching lightning in a jar, but it's about traditions, about telling stories. But that's what books are, too. Books have stories. Books have information. So when you see your grandma and grandpa or your aunts or uncles, you know, and they have to tell stories, I know my grandpa and grandma, sometimes we would hear the same stories 100 times, but they were just as good the 100th time as they were the first time. So hopefully you guys have some traditions like they had in this story about their family reunions. And you can share those when you become an aunt or an uncle or a grandpa or grandma someday. So Thank you again for being such great listeners, and keep reading. Miss Allie?